Hi there, I'm Gideon Rose, and welcome to another edition of Foreign Affairs Focus. We have the great good fortune today of having John Negroponte with us, an amazing government career in just about every corner of the bureaucracy, from the lowest to the highest levels on every issue area over many decades. Most recently, serving as the chair, the co-chair of a new CFR report defending an open, global, secure, and resilient internet, which is a really good document. John, this challenge of keeping the internet open and global and secure, the internet's a wonderful cultural and economic and informational tool, but those sound like political attributes that have to be negotiated. How does that play out? How do you manage to use politics to keep this economic thing going?
Well, I think you're right to say that it's not a purely technical issue by any stretch of the imagination. These issues are very political. They're political in our country. They're political in other countries. This has to do with human freedom. It has to do with access. It has to do with a lot of issues that impinge both on our own lives here in this country and on geopolitical relationships. So, in my view, the real challenge out there is to eventually reach some kind of a meeting of the minds with countries like China about the significance of the internet, rather than bogging ourselves down too much on tit for tat in the short term. It seems to me the real key challenge here is to reach some understanding with countries like China about the future of the internet on a global basis.
There's been a long history of espionage, penetration back and forth, or an attempted intelligence, counterintelligence. There's a lot of obvious corporate espionage in the past, back and forth among countries. How does the cyber aspect of these issues differ, if at all, from the previous challenges in espionage, corporate security, and so forth?
Well, I think the motivation for this espionage remains the same. I think countries that are behind in their industrial and scientific development are tempted at times and do, in fact, try to steal these technologies from other countries. The internet offers another avenue for pursuing that, and there have been recent reports lately about how much intellectual property has been stolen via the internet. And one of the things our report does is to suggest that we make the issue of intellectual property and the use of the internet for purposes of stealing intellectual property one of the questions that be incorporated into future trade agreements. We think that's an area where we have leverage. As a country, we've got a large market that other countries want access to, and that it should be possible to build additional protection for our intellectual property through dealing with cyber issues in free trade agreements.
The U.S. and China have just announced high-level direct talks on cyber issues on an ongoing basis. Do you think things will get better or muddle along or get worse?
Well, I think it's what ought to be done. I can't be certain where that's going to go, but I don't think they'll get better if we don't have the talks. I think it's good for the two presidents to set the tone as they're meeting. I believe today and tomorrow, and I think that they will be able to set the tone for the rest of the bureaucracy. In addition to that, we've agreed within the framework of our strategic and economic dialogue to have a working group on cyber issues, and I think that's going to be critical to really flesh that working group out, make sure that it meets regularly, and that it have people who are empowered to really talk with each other on in a meaningful way about these cyber issues. To my way of thinking, unless and until we reach some kind of a meeting of the minds with the Chinese on how to approach the internet, we're always going to be putting out these fires, stealing here, hacking there, tit for tat. Sure, we can do that. We certainly are going to defend ourselves if we have to. But I think that kind of existence is going to deprive us of some of the real benefits that could derive from having a harmonious and smooth functioning global internet.
You know, putting the U.S.-China relationship and challenge and the global challenge in context can be difficult for younger and inexperienced people. You began your career at the height of the Cold War and have seen so many changes. As you look now at the current global challenges facing the U.S., at the rise of China, at the various problems, are you optimistic or pessimistic, and do you think things have gotten better or worse over the course of your career, despite your own efforts to make things better?
Right. Well, I think certainly, first of all, I think the standard of living of people around the world has increased substantially. When you think about the countries that have recovered from World War II in Europe and in Asia, you think of the rise of China since the 1970s, particularly in the wake of the reforms initiated by Deng Xiaoping. When we accompanied Henry Kissinger to China in 1972, everybody was wearing a Mao tunic. There were no automobiles in the streets. And today, look at what an incredible economy that country has, and it's likely to continue growing at very significant speed. So the world is a different and a better place. But I think one thing that has gotten more complicated and that we got to think about is the world order. We've never had a situation where different parts of the globe have got to find new ways of living with each other. You've got emerging Asia, you've got the southern hemisphere that's doing fairly well now, you've got Africa that's becoming also a continent of consequence. How do you bring all that together in some kind of orderly way, and where people can agree on the rules of the road for dealing with global issues, whether it's environmental or, in this particular case, with respect to cyber?
We could talk about this for hours. I want to go with one last question on this related topic, which is, even if you could get the others to agree and herd those international cats, could you get Washington to play some kind of constructive policy role? As you look at what seems like to most of us the dysfunction of Washington today in terms of its politics and policy.
Well, I do think, though, in Washington and in the United States as a whole, there's a pretty strong consensus on the way the internet should be dealt with. I think people believe it ought to be free and open, that it ought to be regulated as little as possible, although maybe it will have to be regulated a bit more than it has been in the past. But I think we're going to always have a bias towards allowing as much freedom of action as possible on the internet. It's our philosophy. We think of the internet as kind of a bottom-up phenomenon. There are people and countries that would like to treat it as sort of a top-down institution. Americans resist that, and I think rightfully so. I think it would crimp our style in terms of creativity, innovation, and so forth. I think one of the great things that the internet in its present form has brought us and creates the opportunity for a lot of other countries is for opportunities for innovation, for creativeness, for the full realization of human potential around the world. And I think that's what we need to work for.
Not to mention funny cat pictures, which are very important. Thank you, John Negroponte, and thank all of you. We'll see you on a future edition of Foreign Affairs Focus.